An 8-year-old boy was walking his grandfather home when the old man suddenly stopped and asked, "Who are you?" As tears rolled down the child's face, the grandfather whispered something that made everyone around them freeze. The digital alarm clock on Jordan's nightstand showed 5:45 a.m. when his eyes snapped open. No need for the actual alarm anymore. His body knew the routine. The 8-year-old sat up in his twin bed, rubbing sleep from his eyes while his feet searched for his worn blue slippers in the dark. Through the thin walls of their two-bedroom apartment, he heard his mother's shower running. She had the early shift at Atlanta General today. Jordan pushed himself up and walked to the kitchen, his slippers making soft, scratching sounds against the linoleum floor. First task, breakfast. He pulled open the refrigerator door, squinting at the bright light. 2 eggs left in the carton. The bread bag had maybe 4 slices. Jordan grabbed the eggs and bread, then reached for the almost empty gallon of milk. "Who's there?" His grandfather's voice called out from the second bedroom, shaky and uncertain. "It's me, Grandpa Thomas. It's Jordan. I'm making breakfast." He kept his voice steady, just like his mom taught him. Shuffling footsteps approached the kitchen. Thomas appeared in the doorway, wearing his striped pajamas, his gray hair sticking up on one side. He blinked at Jordan, then at the kitchen around him. "Sarah, is that you cooking?" Jordan's hands stilled over the egg carton. Sarah was his grandmother's name. She'd been gone 3 years now. "No, Grandpa. It's Jordan. Mom's in the shower. She has to work early today." Thomas's face cleared slightly. "Jordan." "Yes, of course." He lowered himself into one of the kitchen chairs, his movements careful and precise. "What time is it?" "Almost 6. Would you like some eggs and toast?" "Toast, yes." Thomas nodded, then frowned. "Did I take my pills yet?" "Not yet, Grandpa. We'll do that after breakfast, like always." Jordan cracked the eggs into a bowl, added a splash of milk, and beat them with a fork. The ritual was so familiar his hands moved on autopilot. Behind him, he heard his grandfather muttering softly, "Toast and eggs. Sarah always made them just right." Jordan focused on the pan heating up on the stove, adding a small pat of butter. They needed to make it last. His mom's footsteps approached, and he turned to see her already in her blue nurse's scrubs, hair pulled back neatly. "Morning, baby." She kissed the top of his head, then moved to Thomas. "Good morning, Dad." Thomas looked up at her. "Linda, you're up early. Early shift today." She pulled a stack of envelopes from her bag and sat at the table, thumbing through them. Her forehead creased as she opened one, then another. Jordan poured the eggs into the pan, watching them start to bubble. He knew those envelopes. Bills. More and more of them lately, since Mom had to cut back her hours to help with Grandpa. "Jordan, remember Mrs. Peterson from the foundation is coming by later to talk about those programs," his mom said, tucking the bills back into her bag. "And you need to take Grandpa to pick up his prescription at Walker's Pharmacy. Think you can handle that?" "Yes, ma'am." Jordan flipped the eggs, then dropped bread into the toaster. "I've got the list you made." The toast popped up just as the eggs finished. Jordan divided everything onto 3 plates, making sure Thomas got the slightly larger portion. His grandfather needed to keep his strength up. "Did you take your pills yet, Dad?" Linda asked, spreading a thin layer of butter on her toast. Thomas stared at his plate. I don't remember." "That's okay," Jordan said quickly. "We'll do it after breakfast, like always." They ate quietly, the only sounds the scrape of forks and the occasional sip of coffee from his mom's mug. Jordan watched Thomas's hands trembling slightly as he lifted his fork. The tremors were getting worse. Linda finished first, standing to rinse her plate. "I've got to run." "Jordan, you remember everything we talked about?" "Yes, Mom. Grandpa's pills after breakfast. Then we need to go to Walker's for his prescription. I've got the money you left in the envelope." She smiled, but Jordan saw the worry in her eyes. "That's my responsible boy." She kissed him again, then touched Thomas's shoulder. "See you tonight, Dad. Jordan will take good care of you." Thomas nodded, pushing his eggs around his plate. "Linda, be careful at the hospital." "I will, Dad." After she left, Jordan cleared the plates and got Thomas's pill organizer from the cabinet. 7 little compartments, each labeled with a day of the week. He opened Wednesday's slot. "Okay, Grandpa, 3 pills with water. Then we'll get you dressed for our walk to the pharmacy." Thomas stared at the pills in Jordan's palm. Sarah used to do this. I know, Grandpa. Jordan filled a glass with water. But I help you with it now. Remember? You're such a good boy, Thomas said softly, then frowned. What was your name again? Jordan's chest tightened, but he kept his voice steady. I'm Jordan, Grandpa. Your grandson. Here, take your pills, and then we'll get you dressed. In Thomas's bedroom, Jordan helped his grandfather pick out clothes, loose khakis and a light blue button-down shirt. The shirt was getting worn at the collar, but it was one of Thomas's favorites. As Jordan helped him with the buttons, his grandfather's hands suddenly gripped his wrists. I don't... Thomas's voice shook. Sometimes I get so confused. I know, Grandpa. Jordan gently finished the last button. But I'm here to help. We're going to go get your medicine. Okay. Just you and me. Thomas nodded, his eyes clearing slightly. Just you and me? Yes. He patted Jordan's cheek with a trembling hand. Such a good boy. Just like your father was. Jordan swallowed hard. He'd never known his father. The man had left before Jordan was born. But he didn't correct his grandfather. Some confusions weren't worth fixing. Let's get your shoes on, Grandpa. We need to walk to Walker's before it gets too hot outside. As Jordan knelt to help Thomas with his shoes, he glanced at the framed photo on the dresser, his grandmother Sarah, smiling next to Thomas at some long-ago picnic. His grandfather followed his gaze. I miss her, Thomas whispered. Me too, Grandpa. Jordan tied the laces carefully. Me too. The morning sun was just starting to warm the air as they prepared to leave the apartment. Jordan double-checked his backpack. Wallet with the prescription money, house key, Thomas's ID, and the family photos he always carried. Just in case. Little did he know how much he'd need them today. The morning heat was already building as Jordan and Thomas stepped onto the cracked sidewalk outside their apartment building. Jordan held his grandfather's hand firmly but gently, just as his mother had taught him. The familiar route to Walker's pharmacy stretched ahead, 6 blocks of sun-baked concrete. Watch the step here, Grandpa, Jordan said, guiding Thomas over an uneven section of pavement. The old man's grip tightened slightly. You know, Thomas began, his voice taking on the distant tone that usually meant a story was coming. I used to walk this same street to school. Must have been 1955. Or was it 65? Jordan nodded encouragingly. What was it like back then, Grandpa? Different. All different. Thomas's free hand gestured at the buildings around them. There was a candy store right there, run by old Mr. Johnson. Used to save my pennies for root beer barrels. He squinted at the dollar store that now occupied the space. Where did it go? That was a long time ago, Jordan said softly. Things change. They passed Mrs. Rodriguez watering the small patch of flowers outside her ground floor apartment. She waved, and Jordan waved back. Thomas stared at her blankly. Good morning, Mr. Thomas, Mrs. Rodriguez called out. Beautiful day for a walk. Thomas leaned down to whisper to Jordan. Who is that woman? That's Mrs. Rodriguez, Grandpa. She lives in 1A. She gives us tomatoes from her garden sometimes. Oh. Thomas straightened up, managing a small wave. Good morning. They continued walking, the sun climbing higher. Jordan felt sweat beginning to dampen his t-shirt. He should have brought water. The pharmacy was still 4 blocks away. Sarah, Thomas said suddenly. Sarah would know who that woman was. Jordan's heart squeezed. Grandpa. She remembers everyone. Where is she today? Why isn't she walking with us? A group of kids from Jordan's school passed on their bikes, shouting greetings. The sudden noise made Thomas jump, his grip on Jordan's hand becoming painful. It's okay, Jordan said quickly. Just some kids from my class. Thomas's eyes darted around the street. What class? Where are we going? To Walker's pharmacy, remember? To get your medicine. Medicine? Thomas stopped walking, his breathing becoming rapid. Am I sick? Jordan reached into his backpack with his free hand, pulling out the small photo album he always carried. Here, Grandpa. Look at this picture. He opened to a recent photo of Thomas, Linda, and himself at the park. See? We're going to get your regular medicine. Mom says it helps you think clearer. Thomas stared at the photo for a long moment. His breathing slowed. Linda. And you're... Jordan. Your grandson. Jordan. Yes. Thomas touched the photo gently. My grandson. They started walking again. The pharmacy was still 3 blocks away, and Jordan could feel his shirt sticking to his back in the Georgia heat. A city bus rumbled past, making Thomas flinch again. "Everything's so loud now," Thomas muttered. "Not like before. Before was quieter." "We're almost there, Grandpa. Then we can rest in the air conditioning." They passed the local market where they usually bought groceries. Thomas pointed at it with his free hand. "Sarah shops there. She always gets the best deals." His face brightened. "Maybe she's there now. Should we check?" Jordan swallowed hard. "Not today, Grandpa. We need to get to the pharmacy first." "The pharmacy?" Thomas's voice trailed off. "What pharmacy?" "Walker's. For your medicine. Remember the picture I showed you?" Thomas nodded slowly, but his eyes were becoming unfocused. Jordan could feel his grandfather's hand starting to tremble. The sun beat down on them as they waited at a crosswalk. "Red light means stop," Thomas said suddenly, his voice taking on a teaching tone. "I taught you that when you were little." "Did I teach you that?" "That was Mom," Jordan said gently. "But you taught me how to tie my shoes." "Did I?" Thomas looked down at Jordan's worn sneakers. "Those look like Bobby's shoes. Bobby always wanted blue sneakers." "Who's Bobby, Grandpa?" "My little brother. He's probably waiting for me at home." Thomas turned around, trying to pull Jordan in the opposite direction. "We should go home. Bobby's waiting." Jordan held firm, his heart racing. "Grandpa, Bobby's not waiting. Remember? We're going to Walker's pharmacy. Don't tell me about my own brother." Thomas's voice rose, drawing looks from passing pedestrians. "I need to get home. Bobby's waiting." Jordan's hands shook as he pulled out the photo album again. "Look, Grandpa. Look at our pictures." But Thomas was becoming more agitated, his eyes wild. "Let go of me. I don't know you. Bobby's waiting." A woman pushing a stroller crossed to the other side of the street, giving them a wide berth. Jordan felt tears threatening, but forced them back. He had to stay calm, had to keep his grandfather calm. "Please, Grandpa. I'm Jordan, your grandson. We're almost at Walker's." Thomas stopped trying to pull away, but his whole body was shaking now. "Jordan?" "Yes, Grandpa. Remember the eggs this morning? Remember Mom leaving for work?" Slowly, gradually, Thomas's breathing steadied. He looked around the street, then down at Jordan. "Where are we going?" "Walker's pharmacy. For your medicine. 2 more blocks." "2 more blocks," Thomas repeated. "And you're Jordan?" "Yes, Grandpa." They started walking again, more slowly now. The sidewalk shimmered in the heat. Jordan wished again that he'd brought water. His grandfather's hand felt hot and trembling in his grip. "Sarah would remember the way," Thomas mumbled. "Sarah always knows where to go." Jordan just squeezed his grandfather's hand and kept walking. The pharmacy sign was visible now, a blue and white beacon in the morning haze. "Just 1 more block." Thomas stopped again, but this time his voice was different. Smaller. "I'm tired, Jordan." "I know, Grandpa. We're almost there. See the blue sign? Blue like Bobby's sneakers." Jordan didn't correct him this time. They just kept walking, step by step, until finally the pharmacy's automatic doors slid open, releasing a blast of cool air. "Welcome to Walker's," called the familiar voice of Mr. Walker himself from behind the counter. His smile faded slightly as he saw Thomas's condition. "Why don't you two sit down while I get your prescription ready?" Jordan led his grandfather to one of the plastic chairs against the wall. Thomas sank into it, his eyes closed. "Sarah will be here soon," he murmured. "She'll know what to do." Jordan sat next to him, still holding his hand, the weight of the prescription money heavy in his backpack. The cool air raised goosebumps on his sweaty arms. They still had to walk back home. The walk home from Walker's pharmacy started quietly enough. The white paper bag with Thomas's prescription crinkled in Jordan's backpack with each step. The sun had climbed higher, turning the Atlanta sidewalk into a griddle. "We should get out of this heat," Jordan said, guiding his grandfather around a broken bottle on the concrete. "Just 5 more blocks, Grandpa." Thomas walked beside him, his steps slower than before. The air conditioning in the pharmacy had helped, but now sweat beaded on his forehead again. He hadn't spoken since they'd left Walker's. They passed the market again, and Jordan felt his grandfather's pace slow even further. Thomas stared at the store's entrance, his expression confused. "Something's different," Thomas muttered. "It didn't look like that before." "It's the same store, Grandpa. We pass it every day. Thomas shook his head. No, no. The sign was green. Mr. Harrison always kept it painted green. That was a long time ago, Jordan said softly. Remember? We talked about how things change. They made it another block before Thomas stopped completely. His hand slipped from Jordan's grasp as he turned in a slow circle, looking at the buildings around them. This isn't right, he said, his voice rising. None of this is right. Jordan reached for his grandfather's hand again. It's okay, Grandpa. We're just walking home. Thomas pulled away. Home? This isn't the way home. His eyes darted from building to building. Where are the houses? There used to be houses here. A few people walking past glanced their way. Jordan felt his chest tighten as he recognized the signs of his grandfather's growing agitation. Please, Grandpa, take my hand. I'll show you the way. Show me? Thomas's voice cracked. Who are you? The words hit Jordan like a physical blow. He swallowed hard, reaching for his backpack. I'm Jordan, Grandpa. Your grandson. Let me show you our pictures. But Thomas was backing away now, his eyes wide with fear. Stay back. I don't know you. A group of teenagers on the opposite sidewalk stopped to watch. One of them laughed, nudging his friend. Yo, check out the old man, one called out. He's losing it. Shut up, Jordan shouted, immediately regretting it as Thomas flinched at his raised voice. Sarah? Thomas called out, his voice trembling. Sarah, where are you? Jordan's hands shook as he pulled out the photo album. Look, Grandpa, please look at our pictures. But Thomas wasn't looking at him anymore. His eyes were fixed on something distant, something only he could see. The houses were here, right here, and the Johnson's dog used to bark at us from behind that fence. More people were stopping now, forming a small crowd. Jordan heard whispers, saw phones being pulled out. Should we call someone? Is that kid okay with him? Somebody should do something. Grandpa, please. Jordan's voice broke. It's me. It's Jordan. Thomas's legs seemed to give out, and he sank to the hot sidewalk. I want to go home, he whispered. Please, I just want to go home. Jordan knelt beside him, ignoring the rough concrete burning through his jeans. I'll take you home, Grandpa. I promise. Just take my hand. Home. Thomas looked up, tears rolling down his weathered cheeks. But where is home? A car horn blared nearby, making Thomas cover his ears with trembling hands. The teenagers across the street were openly filming now, laughing among themselves. World's oldest TikTok, one of them called out. Jordan felt tears streaming down his own face now. He pulled out the photo album one more time, his hands shaking so badly he could barely open it. Look, Grandpa, here we are at Christmas. And here's Mom making your birthday cake. And this one, his voice caught. This one is you and Grandma Sarah at the park. Thomas's hands slowly lowered from his ears. He stared at the photos, his breathing ragged. Sarah. He touched the photo with a trembling finger. My Sarah. Yes, Grandpa. That's Grandma Sarah. Thomas looked up at Jordan, really looked at him for the first time since they left the pharmacy. But Sarah's gone, isn't she? Jordan nodded, unable to speak. And you're? Thomas's voice faltered. I'm Jordan, Grandpa. Your grandson. Thomas's face crumpled. Jordan. My Jordan. He reached out with shaking hands. I'm so scared, Jordan. I know, Grandpa. Jordan helped him to his feet, ignoring the teenagers, ignoring the crowd, ignoring everything but his grandfather's trembling form. Let's go home. Home, Thomas repeated. But I can't remember. It's okay, Jordan said, his voice stronger now. I remember. I'll show you the way. They started walking again, slower than before. The crowd gradually dispersed. The teenagers lost interest and wandered away. But Thomas's words echoed in Jordan's head with each step. I'm so scared, Jordan. He held his grandfather's hand tighter, feeling the tremors running through it. The prescription in his backpack seemed heavier now, more important than ever. Just 3 more blocks, he said, as much to himself as to Thomas. 3 more blocks, and we'll be home. But he knew, deep down, that getting home was only part of the journey. The real challenge was helping his grandfather find his way back to himself, one memory at a time. Jordan? Thomas's voice was barely a whisper. Yes, Grandpa. Don't let go. Never, Grandpa. Jordan squeezed his hand. Never. The sun beat down on them as they walked, step by careful step, toward home. Behind them, the whispers and stares faded away. Ahead, the familiar buildings of their neighborhood beckoned. But for Thomas, the world had become a strange and frightening place, with only his grandson's hand to anchor him to reality. And Jordan, only 8 years old, but carrying the weight of his grandfather's fractured memories, kept walking. One step at a time, one block at a time, toward home. Thomas's grip on Jordan's hand suddenly loosened. They were still 2 blocks from home, standing in the shadow of the old Baptist church, when Thomas pulled his hand away completely. "Bobby," he called out, his voice echoing off the church's brick walls. "Bobby, is that you?" Jordan reached for his grandfather's hand again. "No, Grandpa. It's Jordan. Remember?" But Thomas was already moving away, his steps unsteady as he headed toward the street. "Bobby, wait for me. Grandpa, stop." Jordan's voice cracked with panic. He lunged forward, grabbing the back of his grandfather's shirt just as a car horn blasted. The vehicle swerved, missing them by inches. "Let go!" Thomas twisted away, his eyes wild. "My brother's waiting for me?" People on the sidewalk stopped to stare. A woman with shopping bags hurried past, averting her eyes. 2 men outside the church whispered to each other, pointing. "Someone should call the police," one of them said loudly. "No!" Jordan shouted. "We're fine. We're just going home." But they weren't fine. Thomas was breathing heavily now, his face red from the heat and confusion. He kept looking around frantically, calling for his brother Bobby. "Please, Grandpa," Jordan begged, trying to keep his voice steady. "Bobby's not here. He hasn't been here for a long time. Don't tell me about my own brother." Thomas's voice rose to a shout. "I just saw him. He was wearing his blue sneakers." More people were gathering now. Jordan heard the clicks of phone cameras, saw the judgmental looks. His grandfather's confusion was becoming a spectacle. "Maybe we should call someone," a woman in yoga clothes said, pulling out her phone. "No, please," Jordan said. "I can handle it. He's just tired." But Thomas was becoming more agitated. He spun in circles, his eyes darting from face to face in the growing crowd. "Bobby? Sarah? Where are you?" Jordan's hands trembled as he reached for his backpack again, fumbling for the photo album. But before he could open it, Thomas grabbed his shoulders. "Who are you?" His grandfather's eyes were filled with terror. "Why are you following me?" "Grandpa, it's me. It's Jordan." "I don't know any Jordan." Thomas pushed him away. "Where's my wife? Where's Sarah?" The crowd had grown larger. Jordan heard more whispers, saw more phones pointed their way. His chest felt tight, his eyes burning with unshed tears. "Someone needs to call 911, a man in a business suit said. "Already did," another voice replied. "No, please," Jordan said again, but his voice was lost in the murmur of the crowd. A silver car slowed as it passed, then pulled over to the curb. A woman with silver-streaked hair stepped out, her face concerned but calm. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, approaching slowly. Thomas backed away from her, bumping into the church wall. "Stay back. I don't know any of you." "It's okay," the woman said softly. "My name is Catherine Peterson. I work with the Atlanta Memory Care Foundation." Jordan's head snapped up. "Mrs. Peterson? Mom said you were coming to our apartment later." She nodded, keeping her eyes on Thomas. "I was on my way there when I saw what was happening." "Sir, would you like to sit down? It's very hot out here." Thomas pressed himself against the wall, his breathing ragged. "I want Sarah." "Where's Sarah?" Jordan saw Mrs. Peterson's expression shift slightly at the name. She knelt down to his level, her voice gentle. "Jordan, right? Your mother told me about you. Can you tell me what happened?" Before Jordan could answer, Thomas slid down the wall to sit on the sidewalk, his head in his hands. "Bobby, Sarah, everyone's gone." The crowd was still watching, still filming. Jordan heard sirens in the distance and felt panic rising in his throat. "We just want to get his medicine," he said quickly. "He was fine at the pharmacy. But then he forgot. He keeps asking for Bobby and Sarah." Mrs. Peterson nodded. "His brother and wife?" "Bobby died a long time ago. And Grandma, Sarah." Jordan's voice caught. "She died 3 years ago." Thomas looked up at the sound of Sarah's name. For a moment, his eyes cleared. He stared at Jordan. really seeing him. Jordan? His voice was small, frightened. Jordan, what's happening to me? The sirens were getting closer. Mrs. Peterson stood up, pulling out her phone. I'm going to call your mother, she said. And I'm going to tell those emergency responders that everything's under control. Jordan, do you think you can help your grandfather into my car? It's cool in there, and we can get him out of this heat. Jordan looked at the crowd, at the phone still recording, at his grandfather's trembling form on the sidewalk. I don't know, he started. I'm scared, Thomas whispered again. Everything's wrong. Nothing looks right. Mrs. Peterson's voice was gentle but firm. Jordan, your mother told me how well you take care of your grandfather. But sometimes even the best caregivers need help. Will you let me help you? Jordan felt tears sliding down his cheeks. I promised Mom I'd take care of him. And you have. You've done an amazing job. But right now, your grandfather needs to get out of this heat and away from all these people. My car has air conditioning, and I can drive you both home. The sirens were very close now. Thomas covered his ears again, rocking slightly. Make it stop, he pleaded. Please make it stop. Jordan made his decision. He knelt beside his grandfather, taking his trembling hands. Grandpa, let's go sit in the nice cool car. Then we can look at our pictures again. The ones with Grandma Sarah. Thomas's hands gripped his. Sarah? You have pictures of Sarah? Yes, Grandpa. In my backpack. Remember? We can look at them together. Mrs. Peterson was already opening her car's back door, the cool air spilling out onto the hot sidewalk. Jordan helped Thomas to his feet, supporting him as they walked the few steps to the car. As they settled into the back seat, Jordan heard Mrs. Peterson talking to the newly arrived paramedics, explaining the situation. The crowd finally began to disperse. Jordan? Thomas's voice was clearer in the quiet of the car. Yes, Grandpa. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Jordan pulled out the photo album with shaking hands. It's okay, Grandpa. Look, here we are at Christmas. Remember? As Thomas stared at the photos, Mrs. Peterson got into the driver's seat. She caught Jordan's eye in the rearview mirror. Your mother's on her way home, she said softly. And Jordan, you did the right thing. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is accept help when we need it. Jordan nodded, unable to speak. In the cool darkness of the car, his grandfather's breathing finally began to slow. Together, they looked at the photos, each one a thread connecting Thomas to his fading memories. And as Mrs. Peterson pulled away from the curb, leaving the crowd and the sirens behind, Jordan realized that sometimes the way home isn't always the path you plan to take. The air conditioning hummed softly as Mrs. Peterson's car made its way through the Atlanta streets. Jordan sat in the back seat with Thomas, the photo album open between them. His grandfather's fingers traced the edges of each photograph, trembling slightly. That's Sarah's yellow dress, Thomas said, pointing to a photo from what looked like a church picnic. She loved that dress. Yes, Grandpa, Jordan said softly. Mom says Grandma, Sarah wore it every Easter. Mrs. Peterson glanced in the rearview mirror. Thomas, would you like some water? I have bottles in the console. Thomas looked up, confusion crossing his face again. Oh, it's Mrs. Peterson, Grandpa, Jordan said quickly. She's helping us get home. Home? Thomas's voice quavered. But which home? Everything looks so different now. Jordan reached into the console and got a water bottle, uncapping it for his grandfather. Here, Grandpa, take a drink. It's hot today. Thomas took the bottle with both hands, like a child. Some water spilled down his chin as he drank. Bobby always spilled his drinks, Thomas said suddenly. Mother used to get so angry about the stains. Your brother Bobby? Mrs. Peterson asked gently, stopping at a red light. Thomas's eyes grew distant. He was wearing his blue sneakers. I saw him today. Didn't I see him today? Jordan wiped his grandfather's chin with his sleeve. No, Grandpa. That was just a memory. A memory. Thomas's voice cracked. He turned to Jordan, his eyes suddenly clear and filled with tears. Jordan, I'm forgetting things. Important things. The raw pain in his grandfather's voice made Jordan's chest tight. I know, Grandpa. Sometimes. Thomas's words came out in a whisper. Sometimes I wake up and I don't know where I am. Sometimes I look in the mirror and I don't. His voice broke. I don't recognize myself. Mrs. Peterson signaled for a turn, her movements deliberately slow and smooth. That must be very frightening, Thomas. I'm scared, Thomas whispered, gripping Jordan's hand. I'm so scared of forgetting everything. Of forgetting? He looked at Jordan, really looked at him. Of forgetting you? Jordan felt tears rolling down his cheeks, but didn't wipe them away. I won't let you forget me, Grandpa. That's why I carry these pictures. That's why I tell you stories about us every day. Thomas touched one of the photos with a trembling finger. But Sarah. I forgot Sarah was gone. How could I forget that? She was my whole world for 50 years, and I forgot she was gone. The car stopped at another light. In the front seat, Mrs. Peterson pulled out her phone and typed something quickly. Your mother's meeting us at your apartment, she said. She left the hospital as soon as I called. Thomas stared out the window at the passing buildings. Nothing looks right anymore. The streets, the buildings, it's all wrong. The city's changed a lot, Jordan said, still holding his grandfather's hand. But our apartment looks the same. You'll recognize it when we get there. Will I? Thomas turned back to him, his face etched with fear. Sometimes I don't even recognize my own bedroom. Sometimes I wake up and call for Sarah, and then I remember she's not there. And it's like losing her all over again. Mrs. Peterson's voice was gentle from the front seat. Thomas, what you're feeling is normal for someone with your condition. There are people who can help. Support groups, therapies. I don't want help. Thomas's voice rose suddenly. I want my memories back. I want to remember my wife's face without having to look at a photograph. I want to recognize my own grandson without having to be reminded who he is. His outburst hung in the air of the car. Jordan felt his grandfather's hand shaking in his. I look at you, Thomas continued, his voice dropping to a whisper again. And sometimes I see my little boy, Linda's father. Sometimes I see Bobby. Sometimes, his voice broke. Sometimes I don't see anyone I know at all. Jordan opened the photo album to a recent picture, himself and Thomas at his last birthday party. But look, Grandpa, this is us. This is who we are now. Thomas stared at the photo. Your birthday. 8 candles. That's right. And you got me that model airplane kit, remember? We built it together. The red one, Thomas said slowly. You wanted it to hang from your ceiling. Mrs. Peterson turned onto their street. Almost home now. Home, Thomas repeated. But will I recognize it? Will I remember which door is ours? Will I? He stopped, his breath catching. Will I remember tomorrow what happened today? Jordan squeezed his grandfather's hand. If you don't, I'll remind you. I'll tell you about how brave you were, about how you told me you were scared, but you kept going anyway. Thomas looked at him, tears sliding down his weathered cheeks. My grandson. My Jordan. Yes, Grandpa. I don't want to forget you, Thomas whispered. Please don't let me forget you. The car pulled up in front of their apartment building. Jordan could see his mother's car already parked there, could see her pacing on the sidewalk. I won't let you forget, Jordan promised. Even when you can't remember, I'll remember for both of us. Thomas pulled Jordan close, hugging him tightly. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for today. For every day I forget. For every time I look at you like a stranger. It's okay, Grandpa. No, Thomas said, his voice stronger now. It's not okay. But you make it bearable. You, and your pictures and your stories. You're my memory now, Jordan. You're keeping me whole. Mrs. Peterson turned off the car. Outside, Linda was walking toward them, her face tight with worry. Ready to go inside? Jordan asked, gathering the photo album and his backpack. Thomas looked at the apartment building, then at Jordan, then at Linda approaching the car. I think I recognize home. And if you don't, Jordan said, I'll help you remember. Every time. They got out of the car slowly, Thomas leaning on Jordan's shoulder. The afternoon sun had softened, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Jordan, Thomas said as they walked toward the building. Thank you for not letting go. I never will, Grandpa, Jordan promised. I never will. Linda rushed forward as they got out of the car, her nurse's shoes scuffing against the concrete. Dad? Jordan? Are you both okay? Thomas looked at her, his eyes clearing slightly. Linda, why aren't you at the hospital? Mrs. Peterson called me, Linda said, taking her father's other arm. Let's get you inside, Dad. It's still too hot out here. Jordan kept hold of his grandfather's hand as they helped him toward the building's entrance. Mrs. Peterson followed with Jordan's backpack, which still contained the pharmacy bag with Thomas's prescription. The elevator's broken again, Jordan said as they approached the stairs. Linda nodded. We'll take it slow. One step at a time. Thomas stopped at the bottom of the stairwell, looking up. 3 flights? Yes, Dad. Just like always. They climbed slowly, Thomas gripping the railing with one hand and Jordan's shoulder with the other. Each step seemed to take an eternity. By the 2nd floor, Thomas was breathing heavily. Need to rest, he gasped. They stopped on the landing. Mrs. Peterson offered another water bottle, and Linda helped Thomas drink. Almost there, Dad, Linda said, wiping sweat from his forehead with her sleeve. Just one more flight. Thomas looked around the stairwell, his expression confused again. This doesn't look like... Look, Grandpa, Jordan said quickly, pointing to the wall. Remember that mark there? From when Mrs. Rodriguez's son was moving his bike up the stairs. Thomas touched the scuff mark on the wall. The red bicycle? That's right, Jordan said. And up on the next floor, there's that loose tile by our door. The one that makes the clicking sound when we step on it. They started climbing again, slower than before. Jordan kept talking, pointing out familiar landmarks. The cracked window on the landing, the faded fire escape sign, the neighbor's welcome mat with the smiling sun. Finally, they reached their floor. The loose tile clicked under their feet as they approached apartment 3C. Home, Thomas said softly. This is home? Yes, Dad. Linda pulled out her keys. This is home. Inside, the apartment was stuffy. Linda went straight to the window air conditioning unit, turning it on full blast. The familiar rattle filled the small living room. Let's get you settled on the couch, Dad, Linda said, guiding Thomas to his favorite spot. Jordan, can you get his slippers? But Thomas caught Jordan's hand. Don't go. I'll just be a minute, Grandpa. I'm getting your comfortable shoes. Mrs. Peterson set Jordan's backpack on the kitchen table. I'll get the slippers. Jordan, you stay with your grandfather. Thomas sank into the couch cushions, still holding Jordan's hand. His eyes moved around the room, taking in the familiar furniture, the family photos on the walls, the stack of magazines on the coffee table. This is our home, he said, as if trying to convince himself. Yes, Grandpa. Jordan sat beside him. See that mark on the wall? From when I tried to throw my baseball inside. Thomas smiled faintly. Linda was so angry. She sure was, Linda said, returning with a glass of water and Thomas's afternoon pills. But Dad talked me out of grounding you for a month. Mrs. Peterson brought the slippers, helping Thomas out of his shoes. Thomas, how are you feeling now? He looked at her, confusion crossing his face again. You're... Mrs. Peterson, Jordan reminded him gently. She helped us get home. Home, Thomas repeated. Yes, this is home. He looked at Linda. But why aren't you at work? Linda sat in the armchair across from the couch. Mrs. Peterson called me Dad. She told me what happened on your walk home from the pharmacy. Thomas's face fell. I got confused again, didn't I? It's okay, Dad. These things happen. No, Thomas said, his voice stronger. It's not okay. I'm forgetting things. Important things. And Jordan, his voice broke. Jordan had to deal with it all alone. Mrs. Peterson pulled a chair from the kitchen table. That's actually what I wanted to talk to all of you about. There are resources available. Support groups, day programs, home health assistance. Linda's shoulders tensed. We can't afford Dash. Many of these programs are funded by grants, Mrs. Peterson interrupted gently. And there are special provisions for families caring for loved ones with Alzheimer's. Thomas flinched at the word. Jordan felt his grandfather's hand tighten around his. I don't need programs, Thomas said. I just need to try harder to remember. Dad, Linda leaned forward. You heard what the doctor said. This isn't about trying harder. Your brain is Dash. I know what's happening to my brain. Thomas's voice rose. I know I'm losing pieces of myself every day. I know sometimes I don't recognize my own grandson. I know. His voice broke, and he started to cry. Not the quiet tears from earlier, but deep, racking sobs that shook his whole body. Jordan wrapped his arms around his grandfather. It's okay, Grandpa. I'm here. But for how long? Thomas gasped between sobs. How long until I look at you and see a complete stranger? How long until I forget Linda? How long until I forget my own name? Mrs. Peterson's voice was gentle but firm. That's why we want to help, Thomas. We can't stop the progression of Alzheimer's, but we can make the journey easier for you and for your family. Linda wiped tears from her own eyes. What kind of programs are we talking about? There's a day center 3 blocks from here, Mrs. Peterson said. Activities, therapy, medical supervision. Jordan wouldn't have to watch his grandfather alone anymore. I don't mind, Jordan said quickly. I know you don't, sweetheart, Linda touched his shoulder. But you're 8 years old. You should be playing with friends, not managing medications. The center also has support groups, Mrs. Peterson continued, for caregivers and for families. Jordan, there's even a special group for kids who have grandparents with Alzheimer's. Thomas's sobs had quieted, but tears still rolled down his cheeks. I don't want to be a burden. Dad, you're not Dash. I am. Thomas interrupted. I saw your face when you were looking at the bills last night. I hear you crying in your room when you think I'm asleep. And Jordan, he turned to his grandson. Jordan, I'm so sorry for today. For every day, I forget who you are. Jordan hugged his grandfather tighter. But you always remember again. Maybe not right away, but you do. The day center could help with that too, Mrs. Peterson said. They have memory exercises, activities to help maintain cognitive function as long as possible. Linda stood up and went to the kitchen table, pulling out the stack of bills. But the cost? Let me worry about that, Mrs. Peterson said. There are programs, grants, assistance funds. You're not alone in this. Thomas's breathing had steadied. He looked around the apartment again, but this time his gaze was clearer. This is home, he said firmly. This is where I belong. Yes, Dad. Linda came back to sit beside him. This is home, and we'll help you remember it, Jordan added. Every day. Mrs. Peterson pulled some papers from her bag. Shall we talk about the next steps? Thomas looked at his daughter, then at his grandson. Finally, he nodded. Yes, he said quietly. I think it's time to accept some help. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the window. The air conditioning unit hummed steadily. And in their small apartment, a family began to learn that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you can't do everything alone. The community center's meeting room smelled like coffee and old carpet. Jordan sat in a folding chair, his feet barely touching the ground, surrounded by other kids his age. A teenage girl with bright purple hair stood at the front of the room, writing on a whiteboard. So, who wants to share their story first? She asked, capping the marker. The other kids looked at their shoes or the ceiling. Jordan's hands twisted in his lap. I will, he said quietly. The girl, Miss Amy, she told him to call her, smiled. Go ahead, Jordan. He took a deep breath. My grandpa has Alzheimer's. Sometimes he forgets who I am. A boy across the circle nodded. Mine too. Sometimes he calls me by my dad's name. Does your grandpa get scared? A girl with braids asked. Mine does. She thinks she's lost all the time. Jordan pulled his photo album from his backpack. That's why I carry this. When Grandpa gets confused, I show him pictures. It helps him remember. Miss Amy wrote memory tools on the whiteboard. That's a great strategy, Jordan. What other tools do you all use to help your grandparents? While the other kids shared their stories, Jordan flipped through his album. He'd added new photos since that day 2 weeks ago. Pictures of the changes they'd made to the apartment. The memory board in the kitchen covered with labeled photos and daily schedules. The color-coded pill organizer Mrs. Peterson had brought. The signs on every door, bathroom, Jordan's room, Thomas's room. Jordan? Miss Amy's voice brought him back. Would you like to share your memory book with the group? He nodded, standing up. This is my grandpa Thomas, and this is our apartment. After the support group, Linda was waiting in the community center lobby. She'd switched shifts at the hospital to be able to take Jordan to these meetings. How was it, baby? She asked as they walked to the car. Good. Other kids have memory books too. And Miss Amy taught us about making routine charts. Linda smiled. Maybe we can add that to our memory board at home. The drive back was quiet. Jordan watched the familiar buildings pass, remembering that terrible walk home 2 weeks ago. But things were different now. They pulled up to their building just as the senior center van was dropping off Thomas. He stood on the sidewalk, clutching a canvas bag full of art supplies. Jordan, his face lit up. Look what I made today. Jordan ran to hug his grandfather. Show me, Grandpa. Thomas pulled a watercolor painting from his bag. Blue and green swirls covered the paper. It's the park where Sarah and I used to have picnics. At least, I think it is. The trees look different in my memory. It's beautiful, Dad, Linda said, taking his other arm. Let's go up and find a place to hang it. The elevator was working today. As they rode up, Thomas looked at the buttons, then pressed 3 without hesitation. Third floor, he said proudly. I remembered. Inside their apartment, the changes were subtle but significant. Labels on cabinets and drawers. A large digital clock that showed the date and time. Photos everywhere, each one carefully labeled with names and dates. Where should we hang your painting, Grandpa? Thomas looked around, then pointed to a spot near the window. There, next to the family photos. Linda found a thumbtack while Jordan helped Thomas position the painting. The blue and green swirls caught the afternoon light. I met someone at the center today, Thomas said as they stepped back to admire the artwork. His name is George. He forgets things too. That's great, Dad. Did you talk to him? Yes. Thomas's face scrunched in concentration. He was a mailman, or maybe a milkman, but he likes to paint too. Jordan pulled out his photo album. Want me to add a picture of your painting? Then you can remember talking to George. Thomas nodded. Linda found her phone and took a photo of Thomas standing next to his artwork. We can print it tonight, she said. Add it to both the album and the memory board. Thomas sat in his favorite spot on the couch, looking around the apartment. Everything's labeled now. Sarah would laugh. She always said I needed labels for my labels. Instead of the usual pain, there was a gentle fondness in his voice when he mentioned his wife. Tell me about Grandma Sarah, Jordan said, sitting beside him. What would she think of your painting? She loved blue. Said it reminded her of the sky over Atlanta when we first met. Thomas pointed to a swirl in the painting. I try to get that same blue. Don't know if I managed it. Linda brought glasses of water and Thomas's afternoon medication. The pills were sorted by color in the new organizer, with clear instructions for each one. The white one is for your memory, Dad. The blue one is for your blood pressure. Thomas took them without argument, a new development since starting at the day center. George takes pills too. We talked about it during lunch. That's good, Dad. It helps to know you're not alone. Jordan opened his photo album to a new page, leaving space for the painting picture. Want to help me write the label, Grandpa? We can put today's date. Thomas picked up the pen with slightly shaky hands. His handwriting was wobbly, but legible. My painting of Sarah's park, made at the center with my friend George. Friend, he said, looking at the word. I made a friend today. Jordan hugged him. I made friends at my group too. Kids who understand about memory problems. Thomas hugged him back. Are you okay, Jordan? With all these changes? Yes, Grandpa. Are you? Thomas was quiet for a moment, looking at his painting, the labels, the memory board covered with photos and schedules. I still forget things, he said finally. But it's not as scary now. The labels help. The center helps. You help. Linda sat on his other side. We're all helping each other, Dad. I remembered which floor we live on, Thomas said proudly. And I remember my new friend George. And he pulled Jordan close. I remember my grandson. Today, I remember everything important. Jordan added another note to the photo album page. Grandpa remembered the 3rd floor today. Tomorrow might be different, Thomas said softly. That's okay, Jordan replied. We have our memory tools now. And we have help. Linda stood to start dinner preparations. Labels on the cupboards helped Thomas find the plates and cups to set the table. Jordan added his grandfather's painting photo to the memory board. Their apartment was different now, covered in labels and photos and reminders. But it felt more like home than ever. Jordan? Thomas called from the table. Yes, Grandpa. Thank you. For everything. For that day when I got lost. For helping me find my way back. Jordan hugged his grandfather again. Always, Grandpa. I'll always help you find your way back. Morning light filtered through the kitchen window as Jordan helped Thomas with their new breakfast routine. The laminated checklist on the refrigerator guided them through each step. What's first on the list, Grandpa? Thomas squinted at the paper. Medication. With water. That's right. Jordan opened the morning compartment of the pill organizer. And what colors do you take in the morning? White for memory, Thomas said slowly. Blue for blood pressure. And the little yellow one? For your joints, Jordan prompted. Remember how George at the center takes the same one? Yes. George showed me his pill box yesterday. His is shaped like a turtle. Jordan grinned as he filled a glass with water. These moments of clear memory were becoming more frequent since they'd started the new routines. The kitchen timer beeped, another new addition to their morning system. Toast is ready, Thomas said, moving to the toaster without prompting. He'd remembered that on his own. Linda appeared in the doorway, already in her nurse's scrubs. Look at my two favorite men making breakfast. We're following the list, Thomas said proudly, pointing to the checklist. Toast is step 3. After pills and water, Jordan added. Linda checked her watch. I've got the early shift today, but Mrs. Peterson said she'd pick you up for the center at 9, Dad. Jordan, you okay to get to school on your own? Yes, Mom. I'm meeting Kevin at the corner. Thomas buttered the toast, his hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. Kevin, he's the boy with the red bicycles? That's right, Grandpa. You remembered. These small victories, remembering a name, following a routine, completing a task independently, had become their new measure of success. The memory board in the living room caught Thomas's eye as they ate. Need to add something, he muttered, standing up. Jordan watched as his grandfather shuffled to the board and picked up a marker. In shaky but determined handwriting, he added, Kevin, Jordan's friend with red bicycle. Good idea, Grandpa. Want to add anything else you remember? Thomas studied the board. Photos, schedules, and notes covered its surface. He pointed to a picture from yesterday. That's George. We painted together. His finger moved to another photo. That's Mrs. Peterson's van. Blue van. Picks me up at 9. Then to another. That's the center. Second floor, room with big windows. Linda wiped tears from her eyes as she grabbed her bag. That's wonderful, Dad. I'll see you both tonight. Jordan, don't forget your support group after school. After she left, Thomas sat back down to finish his toast. Support group. Is that where you meet other kids? Kids like you? Yes, Grandpa. Kids who help take care of their grandparents. Thomas was quiet for a moment, chewing slowly. Is it hard? Taking care of me? Jordan put down his glass of milk. Sometimes, but it's easier now. We have help, like Mrs. Peterson, and the center, and our support groups, and the memory tools. Thomas nodded at the checklist. Lists and labels. Sarah would. He stopped, his face clouding. Sarah. Jordan reached for his photo album, but Thomas held up a hand. No, wait. Let me remember on my own. He closed his eyes. Sarah would laugh about the labels. She always said I'd lose my head if it wasn't attached. But she liked the memory board. She liked keeping family photos everywhere. It was the clearest he'd spoken about Sarah in weeks. Jordan added it to his mental list of victories. The doorbell rang at exactly 9. Thomas looked at the clock, then at the door. Mrs. Peterson, he said confidently. Blue van. That's right, Grandpa. Want to check your day bag? They went through another checklist. Art supplies, water bottle, afternoon medications, emergency contact card, family photos. Everything in its labeled pocket. Mrs. Peterson smiled when they opened the door. Ready for painting class? Thomas? Yes. We're doing landscapes today. Like the park where Sarah... He paused, then continued. Where Sarah and I had picnics. In the elevator, Thomas pressed 3 without hesitation. Our floor, he said, for when we come back. Outside, Kevin was waiting with his red bicycle. Hi, Jordan. Hi, Mr. Thomas. Thomas waved. Kevin with the red bicycle. Jordan's friend. Mrs. Peterson helped Thomas into the van while Jordan got his school bag ready. Have a good day, Grandpa. I'll see you after my support group. Support group, Thomas repeated. Where you meet other kids who help their grandparents. Jordan hugged him through the van window. That's right. I love you, Grandpa. I love you too, Jordan. My grandson. My memory keeper. As the blue van pulled away, Kevin unlocked his bicycle. Your grandpa seems better. He is. Sometimes he still forgets things, but he remembers more than he used to. They walked to school, Kevin wheeling his bicycle beside them. Jordan thought about how different things were from that scary day 3 weeks ago. The memory board was full now. The apartment had its rhythms and routines. His grandfather had friends at the center. Jordan had friends at his support group. They weren't alone anymore. After school, Jordan sat in his usual spot in the support group circle. Miss Amy had brought snacks today, cookies and juice boxes. Who wants to share a victory? She asked. Jordan raised his hand. My grandpa remembered my friend's name today, and he talked about my grandma without getting upset. A girl across the circle smiled. My grandma remembered how to make pancakes yesterday. We put the recipe on our memory board. My grandpa called me by the right name all week, another boy added. Miss Amy wrote each victory on the whiteboard. These are all wonderful. Remember what we talked about? Celebrating the good days helps us handle the hard ones. Jordan opened his photo album to add a new entry. Grandpa remembered Kevin's name and his red bicycle. The pages were filling up with these small victories. Each remembered name, each followed routine, each moment of clarity was precious now. When Linda picked him up after group, she had news. Dad painted another picture today. He wants to hang it next to yesterday's. Did he remember painting the first one? Yes, baby. He told his whole art class about it. Even remembered it was about the park where he and your grandma had picnics. At home, Thomas was waiting with his new painting. More blue and green swirls, but with splashes of yellow this time. For Sarah's dress, he explained. The yellow Easter dress. You remember me telling you about it, Jordan? This morning at breakfast, Jordan said. You remembered on your own. Thomas smiled. I did, didn't I? I remembered. They hung the new painting next to the first one. Thomas wrote the label himself, Sarah's yellow dress, painted with George and my new friends. Later, as they followed the evening routine checklist, Thomas touched Jordan's shoulder. I might forget again tomorrow, he said softly. That's okay, Grandpa. We have our memory tools. We have help. We'll remember together. Thomas nodded. Together. My grandson. My Jordan. Some days were still hard. Some memories still slipped away. But they had their systems now, their support, their small daily victories. And most importantly, they had each other. Sunlight streamed through the apartment windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The memory board gleamed with new additions, photos, notes, and paintings accumulated over the past month. Jordan sat at the kitchen table with Thomas, working on their latest project. What should we call this section, Grandpa? Thomas adjusted his reading glasses, studying the new photo album they were creating together. Important people, he said firmly. People we don't want to forget. It was Mrs. Peterson's idea, a bigger album with sections for different types of memories. They'd spent the morning organizing photos and writing labels. Okay, so here's the picture of George from the center, Jordan said, carefully placing the photo on the page. What should we write about him? Thomas's hand was steady as he picked up the pen. George, my friend from our class, used to be a mailman. Takes the yellow pill for his joints, just like me. The doorbell rang, and Thomas looked at the clock on the wall. 10 o'clock, he said. Must be Linda. Jordan grinned. His grandfather's time awareness had improved significantly since they'd installed the large digital clock. That's right, Grandpa. Mom's coming home from her night shift. Linda looked tired but happy as she entered. How are my two favorite men? We're making a new memory book, Thomas said proudly. Come see what I wrote about, George. Linda set her nursing bag down and joined them at the table. She read Thomas's neat handwriting, then kissed his cheek. That's wonderful, Dad. Your handwriting is getting stronger. The occupational therapist at the center gave me exercises, Thomas explained. See? He demonstrated the hand movements they'd taught him. Jordan added another photo to the album, one from his support group. This is Miss Amy, Grandpa. Remember her from the family day last week? Purple hair, Thomas said immediately. She runs your group. She brought cookies. These moments of clear recall had become more frequent. Not every day was perfect. There were still mornings when Thomas woke up confused, still times when names slipped away, but they had tools now. System support. Linda made coffee while Jordan and Thomas continued working on the album. The kitchen timer beeped. Medicine time, Thomas said, standing up. White for memory, blue for blood pressure, yellow for joints. He got his pills without help, following the color-coded system they'd refined over the past month. Another small victory. Mrs. Peterson called this morning, Linda said, sitting back down with her coffee. The center is organizing a family art show next month. They want to display your paintings, Dad. Thomas looked at his latest artwork hanging on the wall, a series of watercolors, each one labeled with memories of Sarah, of the park, of their life together. Will people want to see them? George's family is coming, Jordan said. And Kevin said he'd come too. Remember Kevin? Red bicycle, Thomas said automatically. Your friend from school? Linda reached for her father's hand. The whole community wants to support you, Dad. You and all the other artists at the center. Thomas was quiet for a moment, studying his paintings. I used to think, he started then paused. I used to think losing my memories meant losing myself. But now I have new memories. Different ones. Jordan added another photo to their album. Thomas teaching his art class how to mix colors for the perfect sky blue. And we keep the old memories safe here, Jordan said, patting the album. So even on hard days, we can find them again. The apartment had changed over the past month. Labels still marked every drawer and door, but they'd become just another part of home. The memory board dominated one wall, but its presence was comforting now, not clinical. Photos and paintings covered every surface, each one a thread in the fabric of their shared history. I have something to show you, Linda said, pulling an envelope from her bag. Remember those grant applications Mrs. Peterson helped us with? Thomas nodded slowly. For the center fees? Yes, Dad. And for home health assistance? She opened the envelope. We got approved. Full coverage for the center, and a care worker to help out 3 mornings a week. Jordan felt tears in his eyes. He knew how much his mother had worried about money, about working enough hours, about leaving Thomas alone. Does this mean you can sleep more? He asked. Linda laughed, wiping her own tears. Yes, baby. And it means you can be a kid more often. Maybe join that model airplane club Kevin's always talking about. Thomas touched the grant letter with trembling fingers. I don't want to be a burden. Dad, you're not a burden. You're family. And families help each other, like Jordan helps me remember, and like you help me with art, Jordan added. Remember how you taught me about watercolors last week? Thomas smiled. You made a blue jay. It was beautiful. Another clear memory. Another victory to add to their growing collection. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the apartment. Linda made breakfast, eggs and toast, just like always, while Jordan and Thomas finished the latest section of their album. One more photo, Thomas said, pulling out a picture from his wallet. It was old and creased. Sarah in her yellow Easter dress, smiling at the camera. Where should we put it, Grandpa? Thomas turned to the first page of the important people section. Right here, at the beginning. Because Sarah, his voice caught. Sarah was always the beginning of everything good in my life. Jordan helped him write the label. Sarah, my wife, my love, my heart's memory. That's beautiful, Dad, Linda said softly. Some days I forget her face, Thomas admitted. But I never forget how she made me feel. And now, he gestured at the apartment, the memory board, the paintings, the albums. Now I have all this to help me remember everything else. Jordan hugged his grandfather. And you have us? Yes, Thomas said, hugging him back. I have my family, my support group, my friends at the center, my art. Linda joined their hug. And we have help now. Real help. They sat together at the kitchen table, sharing breakfast and memories. The digital clock marked the passing time. The memory board held their stories. The paintings added color to their walls. Thomas looked around the apartment, his home, filled with labels and love, with systems and support, with art and memory. Jordan, he said softly. Yes, Grandpa. Thank you. For that day when I got lost. For helping me find my way back. For teaching me that even when memories fade, love doesn't. Jordan squeezed his grandfather's hand. We'll keep finding our way back, Grandpa. Every day. Together. Outside. The city hummed with life. Inside, their small apartment held a family's love, a grandson's dedication, a daughter's determination, and a grandfather's journey through the fog of memory loss toward something new. Not a cure, but a way forward. A way to live with dignity, with support, with love. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There would still be hard days, lost memories, moments of confusion. But they had their tools now, their systems, their community. And most importantly, they had each other.